25-year-old Rasheem Carter, a young black man from Fayette, Mississippi, whose final days raised serious questions about safety, race, and the response of authorities. Rasheem reached out for help from local authorities multiple times, as well as reaching out to his mother the day before and the day of his disappearance. It would be a month before Rasheem was found dead, but there are still no answers to what caused his disappearance and death.
Rasheem was a welder and millwright working a contract job in Taylorsville, Mississippi, when in early October 2022, he called his mother in distress, saying he was being followed by men in multiple trucks who were yelling racial slurs and threatening him. Despite his fear, Rasheem sought help from the Taylorsville Police Department twice, even asking for a ride, but officers refused, saying the destination was outside their jurisdiction. Not long after, he vanished on October 2nd, 2022. A trail camera photo later captured him shirtless, bruised, and walking through nearby woods, an image his family believes shows someone running for his life. Nearly a month later, on November 2nd, part of Rasheem's remains were found in a wooded area south of Taylorsville. Over time, additional remains were identified through DNA. Reports from his attorney, Ben Crump, and the family indicate that his head was severed from his body, with other bones found in separate locations, yet law enforcement initially said they saw no evidence of foul play, and the medical examiner ruled the cause and manner of death undetermined. Rasheem was more than a missing person. He was a hard-working man with a life, family, and future ahead of him. His family continues to seek answers and transparency, and they, along with civil rights advocates, have called for a federal investigation into what happened to him. Today we'll unpack what we do know about Rasheem's final days, the unanswered questions surrounding his death, and the impact his loss has had on his loved ones and community. So one of the places that I wanted to start was in the picture that they found of Rasheem in the woods. A hunting camera caught it as he was walking by, and a lot of people are speculating that it proves that he was actually running for his life. In the picture, he was shirtless, he was carrying a really large stick, and it looked like he was in movement when it caught him. Now, it did only catch that one shot, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about that photo that I found online as well. It definitely looks like he is looking over his shoulder, looking behind him. He is carrying a large stick. It definitely, to me, looks suspicious. He's not wearing a shirt. This is October. It's not particularly warm, but not particularly, warm enough to probably be running around without a shirt on.
Right.
So what happened to his shirt? I did see something that said that you could see bruising. I don't think that there was visible bruising in that photo. It's just because he was under tree cover, the light shining through the trees were casting shadows on him. I think it would be really hard to tell from that photo. A lot of those wildlife cams, the resolution isn't very good. This is actually pretty good photo for a wildlife cam these days, but I think there's a lot of speculation about that photo, but ultimately that photo is what brought law enforcement to his remains.
Yeah.
And I think that it definitely shows signs of foul play, especially if you put it into consideration with his activity the day prior and that morning, because that photo was taken the day that he went missing, which I believe was October 2nd. Mm-hmm. So he had been at the police department the day before. He'd been on the phone with his mom the day before.
Yeah.
And so to see him in that state of, he doesn't have all his belongings with him. He doesn't have a shirt on. And he definitely is carrying a big stick, which looks concerning. Yes, there could be issues with wildlife, but probably not, that would cause him to take his shirt off. And, and it's not uncommon that there would only be one photo as well. The wildlife cams just pick up movement, so they're motion activated usually. So it's not surprising to me that there was only one. Mm-hmm. Unless, it would have been nice if they had caught somebody actually chasing him after that. But they could have gone behind the camera, come from a different direction, so I definitely think that wildlife cam photo is, the best piece of evidence in this case, and primarily just because that's what led law enforcement to his remains, because he had been missing for an entire month prior to that. And the wildlife cams, I don't know that one particularly, but the property owner went and found that image on there. But with wildlife cams, you're not necessarily checking the footage every day.
Right.
It's stored usually locally because it's out in the woods. It doesn't have Wi-Fi or satellite access. They're making a lot fancier ones these days, but it probably could have been that delay for him to actually see that image on the camera. I did see that he was getting a little bit of flack for coming forward, saying that we would have had a lot less trouble if you had just kept it to yourself. What do you feel about that concerning this case, since there are a lot of issues with racial tension in this case?
Well, I was going to say, a lot of my research pointed to the fact that this was considered like a sundown town. And it is interesting that this whole community would prefer to just it kind of gives that like sweep under the rug feel, especially when you would assume, you should give the evidence of everything that you find. And even that picture, I wouldn't even say is that damning to it being foul play even. Like, you can interpret it in a lot of different ways. So I think it's almost pleading guilty by saying that he should have kept it to himself. And it does appear that this wasn't the only case this town has seen where there was an African American who was targeted. And he, from what I saw, like Rasheem even said that there were white men following him, throwing racial slurs in his direction, and he was clearly distressed by it. So to me, it would make sense then that he would be trying to find cover in the woods and grabbing a stick to defend himself, rather than if it was some wild animal. I mean, you have a lot less time to react that way, assuming that if it was an animal, it would have just came at him the second he was there. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, do you have the time to pick up a log, or are you just running, trying to get out of the woods as quickly as possible? So, no, I definitely think that it's a little weird that people would prefer evidence to be hidden, and it makes me wonder what else is possibly out there that people just won't share.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff that could be, known that just hasn't been brought forward. The timeline with him, I found some conflicting information. So that's one thing you always have to be careful about when you're getting all of your information from websites and news media. And even us, that because we're not, perfect, and we're getting our information third party as well, a lot of times, is that you can't believe everything that you read online, because I read multiple things where his body was found 20 miles south of Taylorsville, which wasn't the case. It was, I think, like a mile. And then also it said that the last time he was seen was at the Super 8 motel, which is also not accurate, according to all the other information I found, because he was staying in a Super 8 motel 20 miles from where he was working. He was working, doing contract work, and he had been there for, I think, less than a week. He had been working there less than a week. He had, as you mentioned, welding experience, millwright experience. He was working for a company that I think processed lumber for Georgia Pacific. But he had only been there, I think, around a week. He had been staying at a motel, or Super 8 motel, 20 miles away. He had been riding with his roommate or another coworker. For some reason, they had a falling out, it sounded like, so he couldn't get a ride home that night on October 1st. So he went to the police department, because I think October 1st was when the pickup full of people the 3 trucks full of white men were following him, saying racial slurs. Yeah. So he went to the police department. His mother told him to go to the police department, according to a statement that she made. And she overheard him. She was still on the phone with him while she was talking to them and saying, that he was concerned for his safety and could he get a ride. And can't remember if it was the police chief or, it was Sheriff Houston with the Smith County Sheriff. He said it's not common for a law enforcement agency to transport a citizen or anybody to another jurisdiction. We're not a taxi service. So yes and no. I'm going to say yes and no on that, because it's not a hard line. Like he said, I've seen and witnessed and heard of, especially in smaller communities where the they're not as busy, that you can do courtesy rides. So that's not a hard written rule. Maybe it is within their within their jurisdiction, within their department, their policy, but it's not a hard written rule, especially if somebody is concerned for their safety. So yes, law enforcement is not a taxi service. If you need a ride to work or you're walking home from work and it's raining and you don't want to get wet, that's not an appropriate use of law enforcement for a ride. However, if your ride fell through, you don't have any other way to get somewhere, and you're in fear for your life, then that's a little bit different. Like, courtesy rides are possible and they do happen. So, but again, this is this specific, that was the Smith County Sheriff, and but I believe who he had been asking for a ride was the Taylorsville Police Department. There were several different jurisdictions involved here. So there was the Taylorsville Police Department that he went to asking for a ride when his mom was on the phone on the 1st. And then he reportedly went back the next morning, like early the next morning, like 5:30 a.m. I read somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's question as to where did he stay overnight.
Yeah.
Because he hadn't been able to find a ride. He was back at the police department first thing in the morning. His mom was able to get a ride arranged for him, but she didn't arrive until 1:30 p.m. And when he was talking to his mom in the morning, he said, I only have 1% left on my phone. And he was trying to find a charger, and he had dropped a pin, I believe, at the dollar store.
Yeah.
And the dollar store did have surveillance video of him coming in and out of the dollar store.
Yeah.
So that was confirmed. But there's also the Laurel PD, and that's where his mom lives and where they filed the police report. The Smith County Sheriff's Office, and because there's jurisdictionally how it works in most jurisdictions, and this is not the case everywhere. Louisiana is an exception. There's just different exceptions depending on the state and everything. But typically, police departments work within city limits, and then the sheriff's department handles everything outside of city limits. So Taylorsville PD, is within the city limits. Smith County PD is the county, so anything outside of city limits. And so I believe that his body was found outside city limits, which is what brought Smith County Sheriff's Department in. And then there's also the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, who's also been in on this investigation, and then the state coroner's office, medical examiner's office. So there's a lot of different jurisdictions that are involved in this case, and making statements and everything. So I'm not sure how the quote from Sheriff Houston saying it's not common when it was the Taylorsville PD. But I've also heard mixed things about the Taylorsville PD. So his mom's friend that came to pick him up at 1:30 p.m., she said that she went into the police department, Taylorsville PD, and they confirmed that he had been had called earlier saying some men were trying to harm him really bad. And then she reported that an officer later found him hiding in the bushes behind a gas station, which was the only place I found that information. And that was from the friend who went to pick him up at 1:30. What she reported she was told by police department. And then they reportedly brought him back to the station where he paced around for about an hour on the phone, which kind of contradicts. I guess we don't know the exact time of that because it kind of contradicts with him talking to his mom at 10:30 a.m. and only having 1%. But apparently he was also asking for a phone charger at the police station, but they didn't have the right one. That may have been why he was going into the dollar store to get a charger for his phone too. So
yeah. Well, what I saw about the dollar store was he literally just paced all of the aisles and almost was a little bit erratic, just wandering around. But hearing that piece, it's just very interesting. Not to mention, if you have a man who's loitering around your police station for multiple days at that point, I would imagine you would be like, that. Maybe I should give a courtesy ride because this guy is coming back here a lot. Or at the very least, offering him a phone to call his mother again.
Yeah. And I think Again, it's hard to say without talking to them, because you hear mixed stories about they weren't very helpful, and then you hear that report where we found him behind the bushes, we brought him back to the police station.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unknown like how much they did help or didn't help. It wasn't their jurisdiction that said that they, that they're not a taxi service. It was the sheriff's department. So we don't know what their policies are as far as, whether they can give a ride or can't give a ride. A lot of times you can, get permission to go outside your jurisdiction, or you can, arrange like, maybe you could meet up with the sheriff's department or highway patrol that could then, get him the rest of the way. If he was that concerned about his safety, then I do feel like that more could have been done in the situation. But of course, we don't really know exactly what was or wasn't done. It's all speculation. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is what are your thoughts on whether he was decapitated or not?
So I saw that too. They also said his spine. Did you see that his spine was found like somewhere completely removed from his head and the rest of his body as well? I feel like, and this is just like in some random research I was doing on animal attacks, but to decapitate a head but have the head still be recognizable is, I think, a skill that's a little too complex for an animal. Not unless he was already unconscious and in a position that they could. At that point, though, that's not even an area of the body that an animal would really even want either. So I don't... Are you asking, like, do I believe that he was decapitated, or...
Yeah, just because I've seen a lot of statements that they're so certain that it was a decapitation.
Yeah.
Or a lynching, and that animals couldn't have done it. But the problem that I see with making those statements is that there was a month between when he went missing and when he was found.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in a previous episode about, decomposition rates and being found, like how much does somebody decompose in that time? Yeah. And is decomposition even the major factor? And in this case, they're talking a lot about animal scavenging. So what I read is that his remains were mostly skeletal by the time they found him.
Yeah, I read the same.
Which is unusual for a month. Again, it's October. It's not like 100 degrees out. It's not super hot, conditions that are going to, increase the decomposition rate. So my personal thoughts on this is that he was not decapitated. And I know that that's probably going to be controversial because most of the information out there say that he was decapitated. I don't think he was decapitated, but I do think that there was injury probably to his neck that caused animal scavengers to focus on that area. So if he had, if his throat was slit, or if he had been lynched, and there was damage to where it tore the skin or caused other tissue damage, then animals are going to go to the most accessible part, especially smaller animals. So they would focus on the neck. And then if they, eat all the tissue away from that area, and his neck had been broken or, whatever. But what typically happens with scavenging animals is that the larger animals will take advantage first. Yeah. So if there's one animal that's kind of working on the neck and another animal's working on a different part of the body, and they're kind of like pulling against each other, kind of fighting for that meal, then it's not completely unheard of that the, head could have been separated from the body. Okay. And it's also common with scavenging animals that they take those remains to different areas so that they can eat in peace without having to fight other animals.
And then that would make sense. Yeah, with the spinal cord.
Yeah. So his body parts were found in different locations. It was almost skeletal. So, and it's also fall, which is when animals are, kind of planning on the cooler winter months, and they're kind of, eating more to kind of, get themselves their weight up and fat up for the winter time to kind of get them through this leaner months. So it wouldn't surprise me that much scavenging and that much that he could have been down to his skeletal remains, and that they were distributed, because animals will pull parts away and go share them with their offspring, with their den, with their whatever. So my belief in this situation is not that there was no foul play. I definitely think that there was foul play that got him into the woods in the first place, and also that caused whatever injury it was, for him to end up deceased and susceptible to that scavenging. So I definitely think foul play. I definitely think that, that whatever caused him to be in the woods and caused his death is not resulting from animals, but I do think that his remains being spread out and his head being removed and his spinal cord and other body parts being found. I saw like 3 or 4 different locations that they found his remains. And there's probably, I don't know that they've even recovered all of his remains. And there was also, it said, signs of bone breaks and bone fragments. And again, that's going to be up to the ME to determine whether those were, before he died, breaks happened at the time of death or post-mortem. But I did see that the ME did, when they did his autopsy, which again was a month later. They're working with just bones again, similar to another case we've discussed. But the autopsy did note that there was evidence of animal scavenging, and that's not surprising to me. It explains, the disbursement of his remains. I do not think, like I saw in a couple places, that his body was dismembered. I personally do not think that his body was dismembered.
Well, and I do think that's the popular opinion right now. It's that was just animals, and I think that even the ME was saying that we can't really determine what was the exact cause of death, but the idea is that it was a wild animal. But then I would argue then why the remains are still not being returned to the family so they could bury him.
I think the initial remains were returned because they had a funeral the following February. Okay. But I don't know about all of the other remains. Yeah. And I don't think so when the ME says that they cannot determine a cause of death, that's like if you were stabbed in your stomach and it doesn't touch any of your skeletal remains, then there's not going to be sign of a cause of death. Like stabbing would be the cause of death, or if you were smothered, asphyxiation would be the cause of death. But you're not going to be able to tell that or determine that cause of death from an autopsy of skeletal remains. However, there's the manner of death, and the manner of death is, natural death, accidental death. Like if you're in a car accident or something like that, it would be accidental. If you fell down the stairs, it would be accidental. Yeah. And then there's homicide. So they're saying that they cannot determine the cause of death, but I don't know that there's ever been a ruling as to the manner of death, as to whether it was natural, accidental, or, homicide.
Well, and I will say also there's been another kind of theory that maybe Rasheem was having a psychotic break and went out into the woods on his own and then died out there just from the area. And do you think that that's a possibility here? Because you think about his timeline, he was acting a little bit erratic, but where I personally believe that there was foul play and that he likely was experiencing some sort of threat and reacting that way, a lot of people have not been able to find any evidence of these 3 unidentified white men, or even what car could have possibly been following him, and therefore kind of argue that maybe it was just him having a problem of some kind and then breaking that way.
It is entirely possible. I know that you mentioned, that he was a welder, he was a millwright. He also had been running a seafood restaurant prior to COVID, and he had to shut down at COVID. But he, let me see here. I remember reading about the type of person that he was. It said his family said he was that he was generous. He donated school uniforms to kids who couldn't afford their own at the beginning of the school year. He loved music and dancing, and his only child. He was very dedicated to his daughter. But he was 25 years old, and that is a common time frame for young men to have their first schizophrenia, episode. And it's a critical time, because if you can catch it early, if you can identify what's going on, then you can get it managed and medicated and live a pretty normal life. But so he is within that time frame, the kind of age range where it's common for men to have their first kind of psychotic break or their first schizophrenic episode.
Yeah.
However, we don't really know of anything leading up to it as far as him having any troubles with anybody prior to coming to this town and working this job.
Yeah.
We don't know what caused the issue with his roommate, who he was originally getting a ride with. The exact text message that he sent his mom, that she read on a news broadcast, was, "Me and the owner of this company not seeing eye to eye, Mama. If anything happens to me, he's responsible for it. I'm too smart, Mama. He's got these guys wanting to kill me." So that, along with him saying that these vehicles were following him, saying racial slurs, and his roommate and him having issues, or, whoever he was riding to and from work with, all of those things kind of add up to, yes, it sounds like there was probably foul play happening in this town.
Yeah.
I also did read, that it was a sundowner town. There was a woman who gave a statement that said, that she doesn't go outside after dark. She's a black woman, doesn't go outside after dark. And it's scary to me, to think that there's still communities like that in this town, and that, that people of color, live there and don't feel safe and, in their own communities. So it's not like it's completely unfounded. It's not like that type of racism isn't known to exist in this community. So, if we had other things, and granted, there could have just been something at this situation, with this situation at this job that caused him to have a psychotic break. But my inclination would be not that was the case. And of course, I have nothing to, found that on, because I'm just basing everything on the information that I'm able to find online, which, again, like I mentioned earlier, is not something that we can put 100%, we can't prove it 100% that this is accurate information. But my inclination would be that if I, just started a new job, my boss was giving me trouble, or my coworkers, and then people were following me in cars and yelling racial slurs at me. And then I was having issues with but it's like, was all of that real? Was it in his head? Yeah. And we don't know. Something else I wanted to mention, though, is that there was a news report with his former boss, because that text message from his mom kind of called him out. And so there was a reporter that got on an interview with him, because he's basically gone into hiding because he got named as Rasheem's boss, and Rasheem had said if anything happens to him, it's because of this guy. And I wanted to just touch on that, because it's one of the things that I want to stress, like in our community, as we're establishing and growing and building this community with the Cold Case Collective, is that we don't tolerate doxing. And if somebody is guilty, then the appropriate law enforcement agency will do the investigation, and do innocent people sometimes get off? Yes. Is that right or just? No, it isn't. But I think what's probably worse, in my opinion, and maybe someday we'll put up a poll or something about this, is people who are not guilty, being harassed, being, victimized, and being, charged and convicted for something that they didn't do. So maybe they're not a good person, but did they do this specific thing? And until it's proven, that they did until there's evidence, until there's sufficient probable cause, then we can't be, as a group of people, over the internet, as, members of the public, just charging and convicting people.
Right.
Just because of this one text message. And from what I've understood, like, the mom read that text message out, but she's never provided it to anybody. So maybe it's something that he told her over the phone and then she just jotted it down in a memo. But from what I understood, like, she's never actually been able or been willing to provide a screenshot of that text message. So again, until we have verifiable information that we know, like, came from the source, we have, the screenshot, we have proof that, that text message is word for word what Rasheem said, we can't be just going and, convicting somebody in the public eye for something that they may or may not have done. Is he innocent? I don't know. But is he guilty? I also don't know. He hired a lawyer, and the lawyer did request his phone records, his location the day that Rasheem went missing, and asked him to do a polygraph. He complied with all of those things. And he was shown to be at work from 6:22 a.m. to 8:44 p.m. We know that Rasheem was accountable for his presence until prior to 1:30 p.m. But we don't know exactly how he ended up in the woods, when he ended up in the woods, or when he actually died. So I think that wildlife cam was like 4:30 p.m.
Yeah, 4:32, I believe.
Yeah. So 4:32 p.m. So, but again, if it's a mob mentality, if it's a group of people, then, people can come and go. People can come and join later in the day. So we don't know. We just don't know. But that's one thing. Like, he's received death threats. Threats have been made to his kids and his wife. And even if he is guilty of harassing him, using, inappropriate language, any of that, even if he was guilty of participating in his death, his kids and his wife are not complicit. So that's just one thing I wanted to kind of point out, because that's something that, one thing that we're being careful about, not necessarily naming people and naming names, because we don't want that type of behavior to happen. Obviously, if we have anything that is of value, we're going to share it with the appropriate law enforcement agency.
Absolutely.
But what are your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, I agree. I don't think that anybody should be crucified because they are attached somehow. I think even when he talked to his mother, it would almost be a little strange that he wouldn't say, 3 white men are following me and one of them's my boss. It seems like if he could identify them, he probably would have. And even, just like you said, the integrity of that text message, there's no evidence that it truly came from him, and it's a good sign that his boss did comply with everything that the police asked. And I think there's got to be some level of trust that the police did do their due diligence with him, and for him to be out in hiding and his family to have to deal with that shame, like, that doesn't make things right, and it certainly doesn't bring us any closer to Rasheem. And similar to everybody kind of telling the guy with the hunter camera footage that he shouldn't have shared that, it's like, well, if we respond like this to people, then even fewer are going to come forward. And so I think there's got to be some essence of, we do live in a government or in a society that says innocent until proven guilty. And so I think any situation where you are treating people like they're guilty until innocent, you are just going to hurt the next situation that happens. And my hope is that not only do we, reach an end and some more knowledge on Rasheem's death, I hope that if anything else happens in that community, there's still enough people out there who would still come forward, even though they have seen some of the consequences that happen to those who do. So.
Well, and there does need to be consequences, because we don't want things like this happening again in the future.
Yeah.
this one's a tough one. Again, there's a lot of information out there about Rasheem's case, but not all of it is 100% accurate. There's always going to be stuff that's missing to the general public, and with reason. But to answer your previous question, I don't know if I fully answered. Do I think that he went into the woods on his own? He was apparently, according to the friend that came to pick him up, what she said, the police said that he was hiding behind some bushes earlier in the day.
Yeah.
So could he have gone out there thinking that it was a safe place for him to go? Maybe that's where he spent the night before. That's possible. But again, that wildlife cam photo of him not having a shirt on, not having any property with him, and other than what was in his pockets, that's alarming to me. I don't think that he just happened to be out in the woods without a shirt on, without a backpack. I don't know if he normally took a backpack to and from work. There's no information about what his property he had with him, the night before, the morning of. But I just find it concerning that he's out there without a shirt on, running through the woods. And
I don't think they ever recovered that shirt either. I don't think they ever found it.
I don't think so either, now that you say that, because I know that they did find his jeans, his wallet, and I think they found his phone or phone battery. So, yeah,
that's strange.
Yeah. Hopefully, somebody will come forward eventually. That's always our hope with these cases, is to keep them in the media, keep Rasheem's name in front of people. Hope that more information will come forward. You can always submit information to us, and then always Crime Stoppers are the appropriate agency that's currently working Rasheem's case. I think the FBI did get involved in this, but the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation is Mississippi, right? Yeah. They're all places where you can go and report anonymously as well. So,
I always hope that things will come forward, and I think that the family is still trying to get the ME to look at whatever they have left more, and I think that they are still always posting and looking for anything. And so if anybody has any other information and would like to come forward, I pray for that.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.